In this video I want to talk about the benefits of using a limited palette, and I'm going to do a color mixing demonstration where I show you just how simple it is to match one color to another using some very simple rules. And before I do that, let me talk about the difference between the natural world that we see around us and the world of artist oil colors or artist paints. If you look at, let me just pull up a few scenes here. There's not a single color in any one of these photographs that I can't mix absolutely dead on perfect with this limited palette. There are no hidden shades, no bright colors that I can't mix in every single one of these photographs. So let's take a look at this little still life here, and let's talk about what colors we can mix with a limited palette and which ones we can't. Well, as a matter of fact, we can mix every one of them, but the only ones that are at all in question would be the very brightest colors. So I'm absolutely positive that all these colors, including these roses here, and even that one, because you can see how much less intense the orange is in this flower compared to this one. So the only colors that would even possibly be colors I couldn't mix would be these very strongest colors, like this orange flower, perhaps a little of some of these reds. So let's just see what we can do here. I'll just mix up a little bit of yellow and some red. And let's just put this right here in this orange flower. So as you can see, my orange is capable of reaching that orange. Now the rest of the colors, again, anything that's dirty or not an intense color, I'm absolutely positive that I can mix with a limited palette. There's no hidden colors. Every one of these colors here, because they're just a matter of toning down the color and making it more dirty, which you can always do. So we can match every color in this still life absolutely dead on, including the brightest color there. And I'm pretty sure I don't need to check this red. I know I can mix that. And as you can see, I can easily make a red as strong as those reds. Now mine's a little more orange, but so as you can see, we can easily make the red as well, because we're going to have to tone that red down. So all those colors are reachable. Now let's take a look at this sunset from Africa. And then again, the only thing that we could possibly have any trouble with would be any of the bright colors that you see in this sunset. So therefore, right in here is going to would be the colors that I might possibly have trouble with. But as you can see, my orange is more intense than the orange in the sky. So therefore, I'm positive that I can just tone that orange down a little bit and finally get a perfect match for any color on this photograph. So now let's look at these bananas here. Very bright yellow bananas. And when you look at a photograph like this, you might think, wow, those colors are going to be hard to reach. But actually, if I pick up some pure yellow and compare it, you can see how much of a stronger yellow this is. So where I'm going to have to tone this yellow down and make it a lot less intense of a yellow if I want to match these bananas. So therefore, I'm sure that I can mix all the yellows in this banana. And then these green tips, let's see if we can get those as well. I'll put a little bit of blue into my yellow and just see where we are. So my blue-green is plenty strong, at least up there in the highlight. And now let's look down in the shadow. We'll darken this down a little bit. So no problem at all with the greens. And so since I can mix the brightest yellow and this strong green, then I'm sure that the rest of the colors are very much within reach of the Essential palette. So we can mix every single color that we see in this photograph. So let me talk about portraits. or flesh tones. And flesh tones are always well within reach of a limited palette. And the reason that we know this is because if you look at this face, there's not a single strong, intense color. You might think her lips are strong and intense, but if I take some pure red and put it in there, you can see how much stronger the pure red is. So we're just going to have to tone that red down. So therefore we know for sure that we can mix that color. And that's the strongest color in there. The blue in her eyes, again, is really not a very strong color. If we look at a real strong pure blue, and I have a little dirt in my brush, so it's not going to be quite as strong as I could possibly make it. But let's just put a little bit of white into that. And then if we compare this blue to that blue, you can see that the blue in my paint is quite a bit stronger. And it would just be a matter of toning that blue down to almost a gray in order to match those eye colors. And the flesh itself, the skin tones itself, are very simple. I mean, we know, if you look at these colors, they're almost brown or nothing like any intense colors. In fact, if you had to pick a color that this was most like, you might say sort of yellowy orange, slightly. But if we take a pure yellow orange, you know, it's obviously going to be way stronger than the flesh tones. And this might seem strange, but you know, if I look at this orange, it's clearly much brighter than the skin tones. So therefore, it's just be a matter of bringing that orange down to match the flesh tones. So let's talk about those situations where you can't match a color, or there's a color that's beyond the reach of a limited palette. And so if you look at these flowers here, these are just very intense, these very, very light, intense orange colors I cannot mix with the Geneva palette. And I can check and show you, but if you look, and let me mix this very strongest orange I can make. And just compare it. And as you can see, I'm not quite as intense in my color as those very bright orange flowers. But understand that these orange flowers are actually at the very limit of what my printer can print. When we printed this photograph and I pulled it into Photoshop and analyzed it, these oranges are at the absolute extreme of what even my very extreme vivid print colors can produce. So the way that I work with power colors is, let's take this photograph of the flowers for an example, and I would paint this entire painting without any power colors at all. I would paint the sky. All these greens are reachable easily with a limited palette. But when it comes to the very bright, and even these dark colors down here in the shadow of the orange flowers, see, we can match those no problem. It's just those very lighter ones. So what I would do, and that goes for the purples as well, I can mix the dark ones in shadow, but maybe some of these very bright purples I might have trouble with. But the way that I would handle it, and the way that I work with power colors, is that I try not to use them. And the reason is a lot of the power colors the pigment is so intense that it tends to dominate everything, especially like phthalo blue, for instance. I would much rather paint without phthalo if I can help it. But sometimes you need power colors. So the simplest way to use them is to paint this entire painting without any power colors at all, and then just for those spots that you need it, get a very special color. In this case, I have a cadmium red from a major manufacturer, and I've just found the very brightest cadmium red that I could find in stores, and it's even brighter of an orangey red, as you can see, than what I've got, or am able to mix with my limited palette. And now if I take this very bright, and I would have to put some medium into that in order to thin it down and make it the same consistency as the rest of my paint. But just to show you the color, See, we can match that with this power color. But I would only need it for the very lightest parts of these orange flowers. And the rest I would paint, the whole entire, all the greens, even the dark colors, everything, the clouds, I would mix with my limited palette and just use the power colors for those very few spots where I need it. Let me talk about one other quality about oil paint that you should be aware of. I've got some tube paint here from a leading manufacturer, and this is Terra Verte. So if I take some of this paint, and there's no leveling at all, there's no medium in it, this is nice and stiff. One of the things about stiff paint, now this is really nice studio lighting or museum quality lighting, but you'll notice if I paint this way, you see the pure color. But if I paint it this way, it looks very different. And that's because every one of these brush strokes is catching the light and adding a bunch of reflection to this color. So depending on the angle of orientation, it will change dramatically the color and how you perceive it. And you can especially see this if you're working in real good quality light. Okay? So now let me show you that same color with some leveling in it. And this is Geneva paint that I've matched the color, and it looks a little different again because this has some, my color has leveling in it, but it's the very same color. But now when I paint this on the canvas, it doesn't matter what direction I paint in, it doesn't alter how the color looks. I can paint horizontal, any angle I want. And that's the reason I like to have leveling in my paint, because it's just one less variable that I have to consider. And so when I mix a color and I paint it on the canvas, it's always going to look nice and rich and exactly the way I intended. And I'm not going to get any unusual color shifts depending on my brush stroke. And that's one of the reasons when I made the Geneva paint that I put all that leveling in there so that it always looks good. So let me do a little color mixing demonstration and go over the real basic simple rules of color mixing. And what I've done is I've put some yellow ochre here on my palette, and this is just by a leading manufacturer, and I've added a little medium to it, and now I'm going to try to match that color. And if you go to Geneva Fine Art, we have a sheet that you can print out with a bunch of formulas for various colors, but I've just picked one, yellow ochre, and it gives me a formula, but I'm not going to use the formula. I'm just going to show you how to match one color to another. So let's look at this very simple color wheel here. As far as I'm concerned, this is the only color wheel you'll ever need, and it's very simple by design. So they're basically, first of all, let's look at the main colors. Let's disregard the brown and the white. And so there's 6 left, the 3 primaries, yellow, blue, red, and the 3 secondaries, green, purple, and orange. You probably already know these, but these 3 rules right here, blue and yellow makes green, blue and red makes purple, and red and yellow makes orange. So those are the 6 colors. And then the only other rules you need to know are to make a color less intense, add the color on the opposite side of the color wheel. So if I have a really strong purple and I want to make it less intense, I add yellow. Simple as that. Just opposite side of the color wheel. If I want to kill the green, I add red. If I want to kill the orange, I add blue. Okay, so that's the other rule. Now, there are only 2 ways to make a color lighter, and that is to add yellow or to add white, and that keeps it real simple. And there are only 2 ways to make a color darker. Actually, red will darken a color, but we almost never use it for that purpose. But blue and brown are the 2 darkening colors. So just using those 3 rules right there, we can match any color in the world. Let me show you how it works. Let's start off with this yellow ochre. Now, if I ask myself, what is this color? What is it most like? If you look at a color and you can't tell what color it is, then it's just a very dirty color, and you can just start by mixing anything and then make your adjustments as you go. But let's just look at this and let's first ask ourselves, what is this color most like? And you might say, well, maybe it's most like a yellow. Maybe it's got a little bit of orange in it. It's kind of a orangey yellow. All right, so how do we make a orangey yellow? We'll start off with the strongest color we can make, and we'll take some yellow, and this red is strong, so just a little bit of it. Now, the first question is my value right? In other words, which one is darker and which one is lighter? Now, my orange is obviously way too strong, so I'm going to have to add some blue to it. See, here's orange. In order to dial down the orange, I'm going to add blue. But before I do that, let me just see where I am on my value. Which one is lighter and which one is darker? And they're pretty close. Maybe mine's a little bit brighter. But let's just add a touch of blue and see what we get. And all I'm doing is dialing down the orange. So when you try to match a color, start off by making it too strong and then dialing it down instead of trying to boost it up, because it's a lot easier to make a color dirty. Now, I would say that mine is still a little bit too orange. So we'll just keep going. What is the opposite of orange? It's blue, so a little bit more blue. Just a touch. And now if we compare the two, it's pretty much dead on. Now I know I make it seem easy, but it's always a matter of just asking yourself the right questions. Okay, so if you don't know what to do and you're lost and you put a color down and you don't even know where to start, just mix anything. It doesn't matter, because once you mix a color, then from that point it's going to be real easy to ask yourself the questions. So let's try one more color. And let's just do the same process. It's always the same flow chart. It'll always get you to the color. So the very first thing we'll do, this is an olive green by a major manufacturer. So I'm going to start off by making a green that is too strong, perhaps. I'm sure it is. And the first thing we're going to do, let's just start right there, is ask ourselves which one is lighter and which one is darker. And obviously mine is much lighter color, so I need to darken it down. So first let me just keep my green intensity up and just add more and more blue. So now we're in the ballpark. But obviously mine is more blue-green than this one. So what is the opposite of blue-green? Let's go to blue-green. Here's blue, green. Blue-green is right here. Opposite side of the color wheel, so happens to be right where burnt umber is, but it's like a reddish orange. But let's just use some burnt umber. I like to use burnt umber as my red, or as a sort of a reddish orange. And that's going to make it even too dark. So mine's too dark. Now I can lighten it up again by either adding white or yellow or both. And so do I need any yellow in this? It wouldn't hurt. So let's add some yellow to brighten it up. And again, my green is too strong. And now it's too bright, but let's just add some burnt umber. Now I have a choice. If I want, see, here I am, and this color needs to be darkened down a little bit, so I can either add brown or blue. If I add blue, it's going to become even more blue-green. If I add brown, it's going to kill that green. And so since this green is too strong, I'm going to use brown. And that should get us pretty close. Real close. Maybe mine's still a little bit stronger of a green, but I can just put a slightly bit more burnt umber into that. And now I've got a real close match, maybe a little more yellow. There it is. So let me make a point about matching colors. And one of the misconceptions, there are no special colors that you can't mix with a limited palette. In other words, there are the very brightest colors on the outside of the color wheel. And these are colors like this that are very intense. that are maybe beyond the limit of what a limited palette can mix, like a very intense blue-green or a very intense, orange or whatever it is. So what I mean is if you look at an earthy color like a flesh tone or a color of concrete or a gray building or whatever it is, you can be positive that you can mix that color because it's just a matter of bumping it toward the yellow or the blue or the red. So when you're selecting the colors that you're going to include in your 5-color limited palette, it's important that the yellow, the blue, and the red are pure colors. In other words, the yellow shouldn't have any shifts toward orange nor shifts toward green. The red should have no shift toward purple nor shift toward orange. And the blue should not have any shift toward purple nor shift toward green. And the reason for that is because it gives you a much greater range. If the yellow had a shift toward orange, then you'd have a hard time making really brilliant greens. On the other hand, if the yellow was shifted toward greens, you couldn't make very strong oranges. And that's why when I created my own line of Geneva oil colors, I chose a yellow that I thought was the purest yellow available. And the blue is the purest ultramarine available. And the red is as pure of a primary red as possible. And I don't think there's any 5-color limited palette out there available that has the greatest range of mixing as the Geneva palette does. One last thing to consider about a limited palette is that it saves you money. You don't have to buy so many tubes of colors. You don't have to prepare as many colors. You don't have colors that are left unused because when you're painting with a limited palette, you're always going to use all 5 colors. And you can just put out a little bit as you need it and not waste a bunch of color that you may not even need.